12 human beings walked on the moon. The last one climbed back into his capsule on December 14th, 1972. And then, nothing. Over 50 years of silence. Not because we ran out of rockets, not because we ran out of money, and not because we lost interest. The real reason is something far darker, far more specific, and far more important. And I promise you, by the end of this video, what you learn will completely change how you think about human civilization. But first, real quick, where in the world are you watching this right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Let me take you back to October 4th, 1957. A small aluminum sphere, the size of a beach ball, launched into the sky above Kazakhstan. It weighed 83 kilograms. It carried no weapons. It did nothing except circle the Earth every 96 minutes, beeping. That was Sputnik, and it nearly broke America. Not because of what it was, because of what it meant. If the Soviet Union could put something into orbit, it could put a nuclear warhead anywhere on the planet. Overnight, the psychological foundation of American confidence cracked. Congressional hearings, newspaper editorials comparing it to Pearl Harbor, parents writing letters to politicians asking whether their children were safe under a Soviet sky. Then, in April 1961, Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth. The United States had not yet done that. The message being sent to every developing nation on the planet was simple and devastating. Communism works. The future belongs to Moscow. That is the world President John F. Kennedy stood in when he told Congress in May 1961 that America would land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Here is the part most people do not know. Kennedy was not excited about space. His private letters show a man who viewed the moon as a tool, a stage large enough and dramatic enough to reclaim American dominance on the world stage. The moon was not chosen because of wonder, it was chosen because of fear. And that fear unlocked something that has never been repeated in peacetime history.
At its peak, NASA consumed 4.5% of the entire United States federal budget. Today, it receives less than half of 1%. In today's money, Apollo was receiving the equivalent of roughly $150 billion every single year. More than 400,000 people worked on it across 20,000 companies. Engineers worked 80-hour weeks. They slept in their offices. Families went months without seeing them. The Saturn V rocket they built stood taller than the Statue of Liberty. Its engines consumed 15 tons of fuel every single second. It remains the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown. Nothing built since comes close. And here is the detail that tells you everything about Apollo's true nature. The lunar module, the small spindly vehicle that actually landed on the moon, had one engine to get the crew back to orbit. One. No backup, no redundancy. If it failed to ignite, the crew died on the surface. President Nixon had a speech prepared for that exact scenario. It began with the words, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." Apollo engineers privately estimated the risk of crew loss on any single mission at somewhere between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10. The astronauts knew. And they went anyway, because the political cost of losing the space race was considered greater than the political cost of losing astronauts. That is not a conspiracy. That is the documented calculation that drove every decision in the program. And then, on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong's boot touched the lunar surface. America won. And almost immediately, something catastrophic happened. Not an explosion, not a failure, something much quieter and much more permanent. The political urgency evaporated.
Here it is, the real reason we have not been back. Apollo was never a space program. It was a crisis response, a sprint fueled by existential fear, wartime-level funding, and a tolerance for risk that would be considered criminal by modern standards. The moment that crisis ended, every condition that made Apollo possible dissolved. Missions 18, 19, and 20 were canceled, not because the hardware did not exist, the rockets were already built. They were canceled because Congress refused to fund missions that no longer had a political purpose. The The Saturn V production lines were shut down. The factories were repurposed. The 400,000-person workforce scattered across the American economy. The welders went to shipyards. The engineers went to defense contractors and computer companies. And here is the part that shocks most people. When NASA engineers decades later tried to rebuild from the original blueprints, they discovered the drawings were full of phrases like "per standard shop practice," a phrase that was perfectly clear to the technicians of 1966 and completely meaningless to anyone reading it 30 years later. The standard shop practice had walked out the door with the people who practiced it. They did not lose the rocket. They lost the people who knew how to build it. Every attempt since then has collided with the same wall, not engineering, politics. The Space Exploration Initiative of 1989, dead within 2 years. The Constellation program, launched in 2004, canceled 6 years later with billions spent and nothing flown. The timeline for building a moon program is 10 to 15 years minimum. The American presidency lasts 8. The math does not work. No program survives the transition. The engineers who dedicated years of their lives to one architecture watched it canceled and were told to start over on a new one. And the next generation of engineers watching this decided, consciously or not to believe in any of it too deeply, because experience had taught them it would end before it launched. That is the wound that Apollo left behind. Not a proud legacy pointing forward, a magnificent dead end that convinced an entire civilization it had already solved a problem it had barely touched. The moon is not waiting to be reached again, it is waiting to be lived on. And that requires something Apollo never had to develop. Not a rocket, not a spacesuit, not a lunar lander. Patience. The kind of patience that outlasts elections, outlasts administrations, outlasts the careers of the people who started the work. Apollo proved we could be brilliant under pressure. The 50 years that followed proved that brilliance under pressure is not the same thing as civilization building. One burns fast, the other burns slow. The moon has been there for 4.5 billion years. It will be there when we finally decide not just to visit, but to stay.